Hey everybody, this is Coach DiBernardo. What I want to talk about in this video is if you're a professional academy, if you're a local club here in the United States, it's all about player development. If you're a pro club, obviously, if you could produce top players, you could sell those players. They could play in the first team. You don't have to spend money on bringing players in from other clubs, which cost a fortune, right? So, player development is so crucial at professional academies. But say you're a local club here in the US, if you are great at producing players and improving players, this is a business. You are going to flourish as a business because everybody wants their kids to get the best. They want them to learn, they want them to improve. So, this whole video is about what is the cutting edge of player development and how can I bring that to my academy, to my club, so I can be a leader in player development. So let's just jump right in here with the basics. You have to have a theory. That theory has to guide your methodology. You have to be able to say, this is why players get better. This is how it works based on theory. Now, I have to be able to see that theory in practice in your methodology. I have to be able to see that in your training sessions. You should be able to explain to me, how is this making the players better based upon what theory? I use two theories. One is an ecological dynamics theory, and the other is a cognitive processing model. I find value in both, but I lean towards an ecological theory. Ecological is a dynamic theory that's based upon psychology and how the world works. And I'll give you an example. Like the cognitive processing model is A plus B equals action C. So that's very well explained. It's cause and effect. Where an ecological model looks at the whole and it looks at the person as part of the environment in a constant feedback loop instead of A plus B mathematical equation equals action C. Now, I will talk more about the ecological approach because I do think it's important that you understand a little bit to give you a foundation. So now when we work into our soccer methodology, we can apply the theory of the ecological approach and maybe a little bit of the cognitive processing approach into our soccer methodology. Now, your methodology might be, say, a positional play methodology. You can have one methodology. You could even pick two methodologies and combine them. But here's the important part. A methodology is how you teach the game, how you teach your 5 and 6 year olds. This is what we believe in. This is how we teach them. This is how we teach the 7 and 8s, and then the 8 and 9 year olds, and then the 10 and 11 year olds. It is a progressive methodology of how you teach, and it is not a curriculum. Most clubs say, oh, yeah, we have a curriculum. Well, what is a curriculum? A curriculum is simply a list of topics that you cover at some point in random order. That is not a methodology. So, if there's something you take away from what I just said, it is you need to have your club needs to be based on a theory and a soccer methodology, not a curriculum. So let's move on to the next step. And the next step is a little bit more complicated. But now, how do we take that theory, put it into a methodology, and put it into practice? How do we make this total connection? And that's what we're going to talk about right now. Let's start with representative game design. So, representative game design, for me, this is a big part of my theory because I believe that players learn by being in environments that represent the real game of soccer. So, in everything that I do, my exercises, my training methods are representative game design. You can see the components of soccer in everything I do, which is decision making on the ball, meaningful decision making in every exercise that directly relates to the real game. Now, from representative game design, we have to speak about, is there transfer? And what I mean by transfer is, can we take that training, that environment, that experience, and can it benefit the player in the 11v11 game on the match on the weekend? So if you see here, you see beach soccer in one of these slides. Are the skills transferable to the real game? Absolutely. Ronaldinho would say he takes touches on the ball at Barcelona that nobody understood because he learned those touches on the beach. You see this other picture of a rondo. Well, in that rondo, people are learning to control space and time, how to exploit space and time. They're up against defenders. They have to keep the ball as an individual and as a team. That is game representative. Yes, there's no goal and there's no goalkeeper, but it's still game representative. And for me, we can talk about this a little later of, it is still the whole. Yes, we're missing the goals and the goalkeeper, but it is still the whole. It's not an isolated separate thing. It's a constant game, which is very, very important because there's constant decisions being made in a game representative setting. And not to get off base, but there's plenty of things called donor sports that can add a lot of value in player development. And they can provide unique skill sets because of these unique environments, and the transfer is direct. So here's an example of American football. But the donor sport is called arena football, which is a small field with less players. And this has influenced the way the NFL quarterbacks and the plays that are now influenced in the NFL based upon what happened in arena football, because you have to anticipate, you have to play quicker, the routes have to be a little bit different. And they noticed that the transfer was not just on the players, but on the coaches as well. And we could call donor sports, there's box lacrosse in Canada, smaller goal, it's inside a hockey rink. It develops, it creates this relationship between the environment and the player, creates unbelievable stick handling skills that you can tell who played box lacrosse in Canada and who didn't. And this also comes to futsal. You can tell a futsal player, he has special skill sets. Neymar credits a lot of his skill sets to his futsal career growing up until he was 14 years old. So donor sports, is that something that is part of your methodology? Is that something that is part of your theory? Now, I am a big believer in constraints, the constraints led approach. Everything is a constraint. The field's a constraint. The rules, the conditions are a constraint. Constraints, for me, force players to solve problems in a different way because they no longer have absolute freedom. Constraints are a huge part of my personal theory and my personal methodology. Here's a short video to kind of take a look at constraints of some players in Africa and Ghana. So here we have variability, which is another big part of my theory. Variability is so important. No repetition and no problem solving is the same when you have variability. The field creates variability, and it creates a skill set that no coach, no training session, and no cognitive words could ever bring about in the kids. The more they play on this field, the more attuned they are to the field. Their knowledge base is continuously built upon the more they play. Their intentions are always changing. When they're dribbling with the ball there, the way it bounces, their intentions of what they're going to do is always changing. Their affordances, and we're going to talk about this, what the possibilities on the ball are always changing. You could probably consider this a donor sport because of the field. Yes, it's soccer, but it's so far removed from a turf field. So the transfer would be great. These players are any player should be able to come up with solutions no matter what their environment. But obviously, you see the ball goes into that high grass, their solutions, their ability is their decision making is severely altered because of where they are on that field. This whole game is a constant feedback loop. Now let's dive in a little bit about the ecological model and the theory behind why players make certain decisions and their soccer intelligence and their abilities and their decision making on the ball. Let's talk about that and break that down into some pieces. So the first thing is knowledge base. Each player, by playing the game and being exposed to other players and playing on different teams and so forth, and the longer they play the game, they acquire a certain knowledge base. So when they're actually in the game and they're in that feedback loop, we know that knowledge base plays a part. And what does that say to me? Game representative training with transfer can help definitely improve knowledge base, which improves decision making. The next part to decision making in an ecological approach is the attunement. So, how comfortable and how recently has the athlete been in this sort of environment, right? Because the more attuned you are to being in a certain environment, the better you're going to be. So, knowledge base and then attunement are two important parts that we need to consider for our game representative training and our theory. The next part is the abilities, right? The affordances of each player. So, if a player is super fast, that gives that player an affordance to do what maybe a player who is really slow can't do. If so, your affordances are always changing throughout your life, throughout a game, throughout you name it. And whatever the other team is doing, if they have a low block, your affordances become less, maybe. If you're a great dribbler and you beat an opponent, now your affordances might become more. If somebody closes you down, your angles for passing maybe go away, your affordances to pass the ball become less. So, affordances are something that influences your decision making process a lot. Now, you also have perceived affordances. So, if I've never taken a bicycle kick and someone crosses the ball, I'm going to perceive that as an opportunity to maybe score with my head or maybe a side volley. I didn't even perceive the opportunity to hit a bicycle kick because I don't have that skill set. So, however you're trained and however your skill set is, it influences your perceived affordances of what is possible. And that obviously affects your decision making. Then soccer is a team game. So if I see that there's space out on the right and I recognize that, and my teammate recognizes that at the same time, I could play a ball into that space because we have a shared affordance. We both see the same thing. So affordances really factor into theory and they factor into decision making based upon the science. Now, in this feedback loop, there is something that's called control laws that we don't really have to train. Control laws are just if you were to throw a ball at me and I don't want to get hit by the ball, I would move out of the way. And the reason I move out of the way is because the ball reflects light back to me, that from my eyesight, it's a reflection of light. And as that ball moves closer, the light reflects in a certain way to tell me it's going to hit me. I move out of the way. So, attunement, knowledge base, affordances, and control laws right now are all part of my theory in decision making and again, a bigger picture of how I create my training sessions and why. And the last piece I'll give you are something called intentions. So if Xavi is going to dribble and he's going to make a through ball and somebody steps in the way, then right away his intention is going to shift. Now maybe he'll dribble and he'll go past the opponent. In a half a second, maybe three of intentions got shut down and he had to go with the fourth intention, or something opened up at the last half a second and he was able to switch his attention and go somewhere else and create a different option. This is why in an ecological approach, it makes more sense to me, because in a cognitive processing approach, I would have to couple all that information extremely quick and almost like your brain is solving a mathematical problem to choose the designated action. Where in an ecological approach, when you're part of the environment in this dynamic feedback loop, you are just part of it, it makes it easier to shift from intention to intention. So that is why I lean towards an ecological approach. That being said, one of the reasons for my representative game design is I believe, just like in an ecological approach, that the whole is much more valuable than the part. And I'll give you an example. So when I do training sessions, I believe to break things down into small parts is not as beneficial as the whole. So if I was going to give a whole training session based, like, hey, I think the team didn't move the ball fast enough in the back four, we need to move it faster. Well, that is just understanding how to manipulate time and space with the ball. And if you understand how to manipulate time and space, why do you have to do a whole training session for the entire team because you didn't think the back line moved the ball fast enough? It's all about understanding time and space. Maybe it's only one kid that needed that. So now you're making the entire team go through a training session based upon the coach's opinion, and he split it up into a training session on the parts, not the whole. If your exercises, because soccer is a free-flowing game that is quite random, if the exercises are free-flowing, it makes more sense to me because it combines everything. You want the players, you want every player to be in an environment where they can pull from the environment what they actually need, instead of a training session that is based upon separation and parts for what maybe only one or two players need. Instead, it's all about creating environments that have everything in it for the players to pull from themselves. Here's a brief example of something that would be game representative. You have actually two goalkeepers in blue and one plus player in the middle in blue. The field is sectioned out, so there is some constraints involved, making sure that we have width. This is kind of showing a diamond center midfield, but the goalkeepers play in front of two marked out 24 feet wide goals. Very game representative for them because they're receiving the ball and they're moving in front of the goal like they would, trying to receive it to the side. A lot of decisions being made. Again, this is just a very quick example of what maybe a game representative training might look like in a small lens here. And we can go on and on about, game models and building intelligent, developing intelligent, flexible players who have solutions that could be better than the game models, better than the coach's solutions. This is why so often you see, top players are frustrated with the coach because they have these affordances where their possibilities are so much, it's hard for them to be constrained by coaches. Imagine if you're Lionel Messi, right? How can we really comprehend what his affordances are? We really don't know what his affordances are, especially in a dynamic game like soccer where things are always changing. He could come up with solutions in a million different ways that the coach would never figure out. Then we could talk about, do game models restrict development? Are the game models forcing players to perceive affordances in one way instead of a more wide-ranging way? These are all things you have to think about between your theory and your methodology, your game model, and every training exercise that you're taking on with your club. All these questions need to be answered. Whether you're a local club or a pro club, if you want your current club, your academy model, your player development model to be looked at, I'm happy to look at it. Just send me an email, coachdibernardo@gmail.com. I guarantee you that if I look at your development model, I will be able to add value to what you currently do, and I will be able to lead you down some paths that you probably wouldn't have been down before. And what that can lead to can always be pretty exciting. So if player development is on the forefront, send me an email, and I'm accepting new projects at the moment.